Long before Rome rose, before the pyramids of Egypt had even finished settling into the sand, there was a name whispered around fires across the ancient world. A name that meant strength beyond mortal limits. A name that meant suffering beyond mortal limits too. They called him Hercules, glory of Hera. It is one of the strangest names in all of mythology, because the goddess it honors was the very being who spent his entire life trying to destroy him. This is not simply a story about a strong man who fought monsters. It is a story about a son who was never allowed to belong anywhere. Not fully a god, not fully a man, hated by a divine stepmother before he had even taken his first breath. It is a story about the terrible things a person can be driven to do, and what it might mean to spend the rest of your life trying to earn forgiveness for them.
By the end of this story, you will understand why, for thousands of years, people have looked at the labors of Hercules not just as a checklist of monsters defeated, but as a mirror. Because somewhere in his 12 impossible tasks is a question every one of us eventually has to face. What do you do with a burden you did not choose, but must carry anyway? Let's begin at the beginning, with a god who could not resist, and a goddess who could not forgive. To understand Hercules, you first have to understand his father, and his father's oldest weakness. Zeus, king of the gods, ruler of Olympus, was many things. Powerful, wise in his own way, endlessly generous to those he favored. He was also, by nearly every account the ancient Greeks told, hopelessly unable to resist a beautiful mortal woman. Her name was Alcmene, queen of Tyrants, and by every description that survives her, she was extraordinary, not just in beauty, but in intelligence, loyalty, and courage. She was already married to a mortal general named Amphitryon, and she loved her husband deeply. Zeus, watching from above, decided that none of that mattered. While Amphitryon was away at war, Zeus disguised himself, taking on the general's exact face, his exact voice, his exact manner of walking through the door after a long campaign. Alcmene welcomed home the man she believed was her husband, with no way of knowing the truth. Some versions of the myth say Zeus stretched that single night into the length of 3, commanding the sun itself to stay hidden so he could linger longer in mortal happiness. When the real Amphitryon returned the following day, confused by his wife's account of a night he did not remember living, the deception unraveled. But by then, it no longer mattered. Alcmene was already carrying a child of Zeus. Here is where the story turns cruel, and where we meet the goddess who would define the entire rest of Hercules' life. Hera, queen of Olympus, wife of Zeus, was no stranger to her husband's affairs. She had endured them for centuries, in fury, in grief, in a kind of exhausted rage that never fully cooled. But this time was different. This time, Zeus made a mistake that even he, king of gods, could not undo. Standing before the assembled gods of Olympus, proud and unable to stay silent, Zeus made an announcement. A child was coming, he declared, from his own bloodline, born that very day, who would rule over all the descendants of Perseus, a child destined for greatness above all others. Hera said nothing in that moment. She simply listened, and she began to plan. Using her power over childbirth itself, Hera intervened. She delayed Alcmene's labor, holding back the birth through supernatural means, while simultaneously accelerating the birth of another child in the same bloodline, a weaker, sicklier boy named Eurystheus, born prematurely in a different.
It was a small technicality. It would define the rest of Hercules' existence. When Alcmene's labor finally was allowed to proceed, It was agonizing, stretched out over days by Hera's interference, and she gave birth to twin boys. One, named Iphicles, was the mortal son of Amphitryon. The other, larger, marked from birth by an unmistakable divine strength, was the son of Zeus. They named him Alcides at first, though history would come to know him by a different name entirely, one dripping with bitter irony: Hercules, glory of Hera. It is worth pausing here on that name, because ancient audiences would not have missed its cruelty. To name a child glory of Hera, while Hera herself was actively working to destroy him, was either an attempt to appease her, a kind of desperate peace offering from Alcmene, or, in some interpretations, evidence that even in infancy, the gods intended this child to spend his life trying to win the approval of someone who would never give it freely.
As Hercules grew from infant to boy to young man, it became clear to everyone around him that he was not like other children. His strength outpaced his years by decades. His father, Amphitryon, recognizing that raising a demigod required more than ordinary parenting, arranged for the boy to be trained by the finest masters Greece had to offer. He learned to wrestle from Autolycus. He learned to fence and use weapons from Castor, one of the legendary twin heroes known as the Dioscuri. He learned archery from Eurytus, a skilled bowman whose lessons Hercules would carry with him for the rest of his life. And he learned music, the lyre specifically, from a tutor named Linus. It was this musical education that revealed for the first time the darker undercurrent running beneath Hercules' incredible gifts. He possessed, alongside his superhuman strength, a temper that could ignite without warning, a fury that once triggered, he could not always control. During one lesson, when Linus grew frustrated and struck the boy for a mistake, Hercules struck back. He did not know his own strength. The blow killed his teacher instantly. It was an accident born of temper, not malice, but it revealed something important about the nature of the being at the center of this story. Hercules was not simply the strongest man alive. He was someone whose power could turn destructive in an instant, whose emotions could override his control in ways that would have devastating consequences later in life. Alarmed by the incident, Amphitryon sent the boy away from the city to work as a herdsman in the countryside, hoping that physical labor and distance would settle whatever storm lived inside him. It was during these years, tending cattle alone in the wilderness, that one of the most famous philosophical moments of the entire myth is said to have occurred, a story known as the Choice of Hercules. As a young man on the edge of adulthood, he came to a crossroads, literally and symbolically. Two women approached him, each offering a different path for his life. One, representing vice, promised him a life of ease, pleasure, and comfort, with none of the hardship of struggle. The other, representing virtue, offered him something far harder, a life of labor, difficulty, and sacrifice, but one that would lead to lasting glory and a name remembered forever. Hercules chose virtue. It is worth sitting with that choice for a moment, because everything that follows in his story is, in some sense, the consequence of it. He chose the difficult path before he had any idea just how difficult it would become. As a young man, Hercules distinguished himself in battle, helping to defend Thebes against invasion. And as a reward, he was given the hand of Megara, daughter of the Theban king, in marriage. For a brief window of time, it seemed as though Hercules might simply live an ordinary, happy life, a devoted husband, a loving father to the children he and Megara had together, a celebrated war hero settling into a peaceful existence. Hera was not finished with him. Watching this happiness from Olympus, unable to tolerate the thought of Zeus's son living contentedly, Hera struck at the one point where Hercules was most vulnerable. Not his body, which no weapon could pierce,
but his mind. She sent a curse of madness down upon him, a total break from reality so complete that Hercules, in his delusion, believed his own wife and children to be enemies, monsters, threats, targets to be destroyed. In this state of divinely inflicted insanity, Hercules killed them, his wife, his children, by his own hands, believing until the madness lifted that he was defending himself from something monstrous. When the curse finally released him and clarity returned, Hercules found himself standing in the wreckage of his own home, surrounded by the bodies of the people he loved most in the world, with absolutely no memory of choosing to harm them, but undeniable proof that he had. There is no softening this part of the story, and the ancient Greeks did not attempt to soften it either. It is the darkest moment in the entire mythology of Hercules, arguably one of the darkest moments in all of Greek myth. And it is essential to understand, because without it, nothing that follows makes sense. Everything Hercules does for the rest of his life, every labor, every monster, every impossible task he willingly accepts, grows out of the wreckage of this single, devastating morning.
The first task Eurystheus assigned was simple in its instruction and nearly impossible in its execution. Travel to the valley of Nemea and kill the lion that had been terrorizing the region. But this was no ordinary lion. The Nemean Lion was a monstrous creature, offspring of ancient, terrible beings, whose golden hide was so tough that no blade, no arrow, no spear forged by mortal hands could pierce it. Hercules had faced nothing like it before. He tracked the beast to its lair, a deep cave with 2 entrances, and quickly discovered the truth of the lion's invulnerability when his arrows bounced harmlessly off its hide, and his sword bent uselessly against its skin. Realizing that conventional weapons would never work, Hercules made a decision that would define his approach to every labor that followed. When strength alone will not solve the problem, use your mind.
He blocked one entrance to the cave, forcing the lion into the other passage. And there, in the darkness, he abandoned his weapons entirely. Wrapping his massive arms around the creature's throat, Hercules strangled the Nemean lion with his bare hands. The same instinct, perhaps, that had saved him as an infant against Hera's serpents, now turned into a full-grown weapon of unstoppable force. When the lion finally went still, Hercules faced one final problem. He needed to skin the beast to prove his victory and claim a trophy, but no blade could cut through its legendary hide. In a moment of inspiration, he used one of the lion's own claws, the only thing sharp enough to pierce its invulnerable skin, to remove the pelt. He wore that lion skin as a cloak and helmet for the rest of his life. It became, alongside his club, the single most recognizable symbol of Hercules in all of ancient art, a visual reminder worn on his own body that the very first trial of his punishment had already taught him the lesson that would carry him through the next 11. Brute force has limits, but a mind willing to adapt does not. If the Nemean Lion had taught Hercules to adapt, the second labor would teach him something even more valuable, that some problems cannot be solved alone. The task was to kill the Hydra of Lerna, a monstrous serpent that lived in the swamps near Lake Lerna, with poisonous breath so toxic that merely standing near it could kill, and a body bearing multiple serpentine heads. The exact number varies across different ancient sources, ranging anywhere from 5 to over 100. What made the Hydra truly nightmarish, though, was not simply its number of heads, but what happened when you tried to remove one. For every head that was severed, 2 new heads would grow back in its place. Hercules approached the swamp with his nephew, Iolaus, driving his chariot.
When he located the beast's lair and drew it out into open ground, he began his attack the way he had solved every problem before, through direct force, hacking at the monster's heads with his sword. And just as the myth warned, every strike only made the problem worse. Where one head fell, two more erupted in its place, and the Hydra grew more dangerous with every blow Hercules landed. Making matters worse, Hera, still watching, still hunting for any opportunity to see her stepson fail, sent an enormous crab to attack Hercules' feet while he struggled with the Hydra, hoping the distraction would be enough to finally kill him. Hercules simply crushed the crab underfoot without breaking his rhythm, but the message was clear. The goddess of Olympus was still actively working against him, labor after labor.
Realizing that force alone was making the situation worse rather than better, Hercules called out to his nephew for help. And here is where the second labor becomes so important to understanding who Hercules really was. He was willing to ask for help. He was willing to admit that this problem could not be solved by strength alone, and that he needed another set of hands to survive it. Iolaus' solution was elegant. As Hercules severed each head, Iolaus would immediately sear the open wound with a burning torch, cauterizing it before new heads had the chance to regrow. Working together, uncle and nephew, brute force and quick thinking combined, they systematically worked through the Hydra's many heads, burning each stump the instant it was cut, until finally only one head remained. The central head, which the myths describe as immortal, unable to be killed by any blade.
For this final head, Hercules didn't try to destroy it at all. Instead, he severed it and buried it, still living, still writhing, deep beneath a massive boulder, where it would remain trapped forever, unable to threaten anyone again. Before leaving the swamp, Hercules made one more decision that would matter enormously in the labors still to come. He dipped the tips of his arrows into the Hydra's poisonous blood, transforming ordinary weapons into something capable of killing almost anything in the world, a decision that would prove both a blessing and, eventually, a devastating curse. When Hercules returned to Eurystheus and reported his victory, the king refused to count it. Because Hercules had needed help from his nephew, Eurystheus declared the labor invalid. He had not defeated the Hydra entirely alone. It was a bitter, small-minded technicality, but it meant Hercules would ultimately need to complete 2 additional labors beyond the original 10 to satisfy his sentence.
After 2 labors defined by brutal combat, Eurystheus, increasingly desperate to find a task Hercules genuinely could not complete, shifted his strategy entirely. The 3rd labor required no fighting at all. It required something far more difficult for a man built for battle: patience. Hercules was ordered to capture the Ceryneian hind, a magnificent deer sacred to the goddess Artemis, with golden antlers and hooves of bronze, so fast that no hunter in the history of Greece had ever managed to catch it. The challenge here was not strength. The hind could easily outrun any pursuer. The real danger lay in the fact that this creature was sacred to Artemis herself, and harming it in any way, even accidentally, risked incurring the wrath of another Olympian goddess, on top of the one already hunting him. For an entire year, according to most accounts, Hercules pursued the hind across the length and breadth of Greece, through Arcadia, into the far north, chasing a creature he could never quite catch through sheer speed. It was a labor that tested a completely different set of skills than the previous 2: endurance, tracking, and almost meditative persistence that had nothing to do with brute force.
Eventually exhausted the creature into slowing enough for him to either gently trap it in a net or, in some versions of the myth, wound it slightly in the leg with an arrow to finally bring it down without killing it. Either way, Hercules captured the hind alive and unharmed, exactly as required. As he carried the creature back toward Tiryns, Artemis herself confronted him, furious that her sacred animal had been captured. Hercules, showing a wisdom and humility that would recur throughout his labors, did not fight the goddess or make excuses. He explained honestly that he was bound by the oracle's command, that he had no wish to disrespect her or harm her creature, and that he intended to release the hind the moment Eurystheus had seen it. Moved by his honesty, Artemis allowed him to proceed, on the condition that the deer would be set free unharmed afterward, a promise Hercules kept.
The fourth labor returned Hercules to more familiar territory, a monstrous wild boar terrorizing the region around Mount Erymanthos, tusks capable of goring a man in an instant, strength enough to destroy entire farms and villages in its rampages. Eurystheus' order was specific, and he clearly hoped impossible. Capture the boar alive and bring it back to Tiryns. On his way to confront the boar, Hercules stopped to visit a wise centaur named Pholus, who welcomed him with hospitality and, fatefully, opened a jar of wine that belonged communally to all the centaurs of the region. The scent of the wine drew other centaurs to the cave in a frenzy, and a chaotic battle broke out, one in which Hercules, in the confusion, accidentally struck his old friend and teacher, the wise centaur Chiron, with one of his poisoned arrows. The very arrows tipped with the Hydra's venom from the second labor.
Chiron was immortal, and so the poison could not kill him outright, but it inflicted a wound of endless, agonizing pain that could never heal. It was, in many ways, the first devastating consequence of Hercules' choice to poison his weapons, a shadow of tragedies still to come. Chiron would eventually choose to give up his immortality entirely, trading his eternal life to end his suffering. A quiet, heartbreaking cost buried inside what is often told as a triumphant labor. Returning to his actual task, Hercules tracked the Erymanthian boar into the deep snows of the mountain, and rather than confronting it in open ground, he drove the creature up into deep snowdrifts where its enormous weight worked against it, trapping it until it could barely move. Wrapping the exhausted, snowbound boar in heavy chains, Hercules hoisted it onto his shoulders and carried it, alive, exactly as ordered, all the way back to Tiryns.
The result was one of the most famous images to come out of the entire mythology. Eurystheus, upon seeing the massive, furious, very much alive boar arriving at his palace, reportedly panicked so completely that he leapt into the very bronze storage jar he'd had buried after the first labor, hiding there and begging Hercules to take the creature away before it could be released anywhere near him.
If Eurystheus had hoped to defeat Hercules through combat, that strategy had clearly failed 4 times in a row. So for the 5th labor, he tried something different: humiliation. King Augeas owned the largest herd of cattle in all of Greece, thousands of animals, many of them gifts from the gods themselves. And famously, their stables had not been cleaned in 30 years. The filth had accumulated to almost mythic proportions. Eurystheus' order was simple and deliberately degrading: clean the entire Augean stables in a single day. It was designed to be not just physically impossible, but beneath the dignity of a hero, a task meant to humiliate the son of Zeus by reducing him to the lowest, most menial labor imaginable. Hercules, characteristically, refused to see it that way. He approached King Augeas directly and struck a bargain. If Augeas would give him 1/10 of his cattle herd as payment, Hercules would clean the entire stable in a single day. Augeas, confident that the feat was impossible regardless of what Hercules promised, agreed readily. He had nothing to lose by promising payment for a task he was certain could never be completed. Rather than attempting to shovel out 3 decades of accumulated filth by hand, a task that genuinely would have been impossible even for a demigod, Hercules once again solved the problem through ingenuity rather than raw strength. he diverted the courses of two nearby rivers, the Alpheus and the Peneus, breaking through the stable walls and channeling the powerful currents directly through the structure.
The rushing water swept away 30 years of filth in a matter of hours, cleaning the stables completely, exactly as promised. When Hercules returned to collect his payment, however, Augeas refused, claiming, falsely, that he had never actually agreed to the deal, or in some versions, that Hercules had merely been fulfilling his obligation to Eurystheus and therefore hadn't truly earned separate payment. It was a betrayal that Hercules would not forget, and years later, after completing his labors, he would return to Elis with an army and depose Augeas entirely in retribution. Making matters worse for Hercules in the moment, Eurystheus also refused to count this labor toward the required 10, arguing that since Hercules had been paid, or was owed payment, by a third party, it did not count as a labor performed purely in service of his sentence. Combined with the disqualification of the Hydra labor for receiving help, Hercules now had 2 labors that didn't count, meaning his original 10 had effectively become 12.
The 6th labor sent Hercules to Lake Stymphalos, home to a massive flock of monstrous birds with bronze beaks sharp enough to pierce armor and feathers that could be launched like metal darts. These birds had multiplied uncontrollably, driving away farmers and devastating the surrounding countryside. And worse, some accounts describe them as man-eating. The challenge here was almost purely tactical. The birds nested deep within a thick, swampy marsh, so dense with reeds and mud that Hercules could not safely wade in to confront them directly, nor could he easily see them to strike from a distance. It was a labor that demanded a completely different kind of solution than raw combat. Help came, fittingly, from the goddess Athena, goddess of wisdom and strategic warfare, and notably one of the few Olympians who had never turned against Hercules. She provided him with a pair of bronze rattles, or castanets, crafted by the god Hephaestus himself, specifically designed for this purpose.
Climbing to high ground overlooking the marsh, Hercules shook the bronze rattles, producing an ear-splitting, unbearable noise that startled the entire flock of birds into flight all at once, driving them up out of the safety of the dense reeds and into open sky. With the birds now exposed and airborne, Hercules was finally able to use his exceptional archery skills, the same skills he'd learned as a boy, to bring down the birds with his bow, scattering the survivors so completely that they fled the region entirely, never to trouble the local farmers again. It was, in many ways, a labor that showcased a different side of Hercules than the ones before it. Not brute strength overcoming an obstacle, but strategy, precision, and the willingness to accept help from an ally when the situation called for it.
For the 7th labor, Eurystheus sent Hercules across the sea entirely to the island of Crete to capture a massive, fire-breathing bull that had been terrorizing the island, a creature with a complicated and dark history, connected in some versions of the myth to the birth of the infamous Minotaur. King Minos of Crete, whose kingdom the bull was ravaging, was more than happy to let Hercules take the creature off his hands entirely, offering no resistance to the task. This labor, unlike several before it, came down almost purely to a direct contest of strength. Hercules confronted the massive bull, and after an intense physical struggle, wrestled the creature into submission using nothing but his bare hands and overwhelming physical power. No tricks, no clever engineering, no divine assistance. Just Hercules against the bull, strength against strength. The purest expression of what made him legendary in the first place.
Having subdued it, he then swam the bull across the open sea back to the Greek mainland and delivered it to Eurystheus as ordered. True to form, the terrified king refused to keep the dangerous creature anywhere near his palace and instead released it back into the wild, where the Cretan bull would go on to terrorize the region around Marathon for years, eventually becoming the target of another famous hero's quest entirely, the young Theseus, whose own legend would intersect with the aftermath of Hercules' labors. The eighth labor introduced a new and disturbing kind of monster. Not a beast of nature, but horror born of human cruelty. King Diomedes of Thrace kept a stable of 4 monstrous mares that he had trained to feed exclusively on human flesh, feeding them any unfortunate travelers or guests who crossed his path. Eurystheus' command was for Hercules to capture these man-eating horses and bring them back alive. Arriving in Thrace with a small group of companions, Hercules infiltrated the stables and managed to subdue the mares, but not without a heavy cost. In the ensuing chaos, Diomedes' men attacked, and in the fighting, Hercules' close friend and companion, Abderus, a young man he cared for deeply, was left guarding the horses and was killed, devoured by the very creatures he had been trusted to watch. Enraged by the loss of his friend, Hercules turned the horror of Diomedes' own methods back against him. He fed the cruel king to his own man-eating mares, a brutal, almost poetic justice that, according to the myths, had an unexpected effect. Having tasted the flesh of the very man who had trained them into monsters, the mares suddenly calmed, their unnatural hunger seemingly broken by the act. In honor of his fallen friend, Hercules founded a city near the site of Abderus' death and named it Abdera in his memory. A rare moment in the mythology where Hercules' grief translates into something lasting and commemorative, rather than simply moving on to the next impossible task. The ninth labor took Hercules far from Greece entirely, to the land of the Amazons, a legendary nation of fierce warrior women, ruled by their queen, Hippolyta. Eurystheus' daughter had apparently taken a liking to Hippolyta's sacred belt, a gift originally given to the queen by the war god Ares himself, and demanded that Hercules retrieve it. What makes this labor particularly notable is how it almost didn't require any violence at all. When Hercules arrived and explained his quest to Queen Hippolyta, she was reportedly impressed by his reputation and his honesty, and agreed to simply give him the belt willingly, as a gesture of respect between two great warriors. It could have ended there, peacefully, without a single drop of blood spilled. But Hera, ever watchful, ever determined to see Hercules fail or suffer, intervened one final time in this labor. Disguising herself as an Amazon warrior, she spread a rumor through the ranks that Hercules intended to kidnap their queen. Believing their leader to be in danger, the Amazon warriors armed themselves and attacked Hercules' ship without warning. In the ensuing chaos and battle, a fight Hercules never wanted and had done nothing to provoke, Hippolyta herself was killed, and Hercules was forced to fight his way out with the belt in hand. A labor completed successfully, but stained by a tragedy that Hera had engineered purely out of spite. It stands as one of the clearest examples in the entire cycle of just how far Hera was willing to go, manufacturing violence and death out of nothing at all, simply to ensure that even Hercules' victories came with blood on his hands. By the 10th labor, the last of the original 10, before the 2 disqualifications extended his sentence further, Eurystheus' demands had grown almost absurdly ambitious in scale. He ordered Hercules to travel to the far western edge of the known world, to an island called Erythea, and steal the cattle belonging to Geryon, a terrifying giant with 3 separate bodies fused together at the waist. The journey itself became legendary. Crossing the scorching Libyan desert, Hercules reportedly grew so frustrated with the relentless heat of the sun that he raised his bow and threatened to shoot Helios, the sun god himself, out of the sky. Impressed, rather than offended by the sheer audacity of a mortal threatening a god, Helios lent Hercules his massive golden cup, the very vessel Helios used each night to sail back across the ocean to his rising point in the east, allowing Hercules to sail across the great western ocean to reach Geryon's island.
Once there, Hercules faced not only the three-bodied giant Geryon himself, but also his monstrous two-headed guard dog, Orthrus, brother to the more famous three-headed Cerberus, and a giant herdsman named Eurydion. Hercules dispatched the guard dog and the herdsman in swift combat, and when Geryon himself finally emerged to defend his cattle, Hercules killed the giant with a single arrow, one still coated in the Hydra's poison from labors past, reportedly piercing all three of Geryon's bodies with one devastatingly precise shot. The journey home proved nearly as eventful as the labor itself. Driving the stolen cattle back across Europe, Hercules faced repeated attempts by various local kings, giants, and thieves to steal the herd from him, along with the challenge of simply herding an enormous number of cattle across an entire continent. By the time he finally delivered the herd to Eurystheus, it marked the completion of what should have been his final task, though, as we already know, the technicalities around the Hydra and the Augean stables meant 2 more labors still remained. With 10 labors completed, but 2 disqualified, Eurystheus needed 2 final, even more difficult tasks. And for the 11th, he chose something almost impossible to even locate: the golden apples of the Hesperides, a sacred tree that had been a wedding gift to Hera herself, guarded by nymphs and by Ladon, a massive, never-sleeping serpent coiled around the tree's trunk. The challenge of this labor was not primarily combat. It was that Hercules did not even know where the garden was located. His journey to find it took him across much of the known world, and along the way, he encountered and freed the Titan Prometheus, who remained chained to a mountainside, eternally punished by Zeus for the crime of giving fire to humanity, his liver eaten daily by an eagle and regrown each night to be eaten again. Hercules killed the eagle and broke Prometheus's chains, freeing him after untold centuries of suffering, an act of mercy that, in gratitude, led Prometheus to advise Hercules on how to finally complete his search. Prometheus directed Hercules to the Titan Atlas, condemned by Zeus to hold up the entire weight of the sky on his shoulders for eternity. Atlas, it turned out, was the father of the Hesperides nymphs who guarded the golden apples, and
Hercules offered to hold up the sky while Atlas retrieved the apples, an almost unimaginable weight, taken on voluntarily purely so that another suffering being could have a moment's relief and complete a task Hercules himself could not. When Atlas returned with the golden apples, however, he had grown to enjoy his brief taste of freedom after countless years trapped beneath the sky, and announced that he had no intention of taking the burden back. He would deliver the apples to Eurystheus himself, leaving Hercules to hold up the heavens forever in his place. Facing this betrayal, Hercules once again relied on cleverness rather than confrontation. He agreed readily to Atlas's plan, but asked for one small favor first. Could Atlas hold the sky just a moment longer so Hercules could adjust a cushion on his shoulders to bear the weight more comfortably? Atlas, seeing no harm in the request, set down the apples and took the sky back onto his own shoulders. The instant the weight transferred, Hercules simply picked up the golden apples and walked away, leaving Atlas exactly where he had been before, trapped beneath the heavens once again, outsmarted by a mortal. For the 12th and final labor, Eurystheus, nearly out of ideas and increasingly desperate to assign a task he was certain no living being could survive, commanded Hercules to travel into the underworld itself and capture Cerberus, the monstrous 3-headed hound that guarded the gates of the dead, preventing the living from entering and the dead from ever leaving. This was not simply a monster hunt. This was a journey into the realm of Hades, Lord of the Dead,
into the one place in the entire cosmos that even the gods generally chose not to disturb without invitation. Guided partly by the god Hermes, whose role included escorting souls to the underworld, and by Athena, who had supported Hercules throughout many of his trials, Hercules descended into the land of the dead. Along the way, he encountered spirits and shades of the deceased, including, in some versions of the myth, an encounter with the ghost of the fallen Gorgon Medusa, and a meeting with the trapped hero Theseus, whom Hercules was able to free from a magical chair that had bound him since a previous ill-fated adventure. Finally standing before Hades himself, ruler of the dead, Hercules made his request directly and respectfully. He needed to borrow Cerberus, temporarily, to complete his final labor. Hades, perhaps out of respect for Hercules' honesty in asking rather than simply attempting to steal the hound, agreed to a single condition. Hercules could take Cerberus, but only if he could subdue the beast.
It was, in many ways, a perfect final trial, a return to the exact method that had defined Hercules' very first labor, strangling the Nemean Lion with his bare hands. Now, facing arguably the single most terrifying creature in all of Greek mythology, he would need to rely on that same raw physical courage one final time. Wearing his impenetrable lion skin cloak as armor against Cerberus' 3 sets of snapping jaws, Hercules wrestled the massive hound into submission through sheer strength and endurance, eventually pinning it securely enough to bind and carry it alive out of the underworld and back into the world of the living. When he arrived in Tiryns and presented the 3-headed guardian of the dead to Eurystheus, the terrified king, who had spent 12 years assigning increasingly impossible tasks specifically hoping to see Hercules fail or die, reportedly begged Hercules to take the monstrous creature back to the underworld immediately, unable to even look at it directly. Hercules obliged, returning Cerberus safely to Hades exactly as he had promised. With that final act, 12 labors, assigned across 12 grueling years, filled with monsters, gods, betrayals, grief, and impossible odds, had finally, at long last, come to an end.
With his sentence finally complete and his 12 years of servitude behind him, Hercules was free, cleansed, according to the terms set by the Oracle of Delphi, of the terrible guilt he had carried since the day Hera's curse of madness took everything from him. But freedom did not mean peace. Hercules' later life continued to be marked by adventure, further heroics. He sailed with Jason and the Argonauts for a time, fought in wars, founded cities, and eventually remarried to a woman named Deianira. It was this second marriage that would ultimately lead to his death, in a story almost unbearably cruel in its irony. While traveling with Deianira, the couple needed to cross a dangerous river, and a centaur named Nessus offered to carry Deianira across on his back. Partway across, Nessus attempted to assault her, and Hercules, seeing the attack from the riverbank, shot the centaur with one of his poisoned arrows, the same hydra venom that had defined so much of his journey, killing Nessus instantly. But as he lay dying, the centaur devised one final act of vengeance. He told Deianira, with his last breath, that his blood possessed magical properties, that if she ever feared Hercules' love for her was fading, she should soak a garment in his blood and have Hercules wear it, and it would restore his devotion to her forever. The son she had cursed from before his birth became, in the end, a true god of Olympus.
It was a lie. The centaur's blood was contaminated with the same hydra poison that had killed him, and Deianira, believing she was preserving her marriage, unknowingly kept the poisoned blood for years, waiting for a moment she thought she might need it. Eventually, hearing rumors, false as it turned out, that Hercules had fallen in love with another woman, Deianira, desperate and afraid of losing him, sent him a robe soaked in the centaur's blood, believing it would rekindle his love. The moment Hercules put on the robe, the poison, the same venom that had ended so many lives throughout his 12 labors, began to burn through his skin, an agony beyond anything even he could endure. Realizing too late what she had done, and unable to bear the horror of having killed the man she loved, Deianira took her own life. Hercules, in unbearable pain, and knowing the wound was beyond any cure, made a final decision, entirely in keeping with the choice he had made as a young man at that legendary crossroads decades earlier. Rather than suffer an agonizing, drawn-out death, he built his own funeral pyre on Mount Oeta, climbed onto it himself, and asked to be set alight. As the flames consumed his mortal body, the myths tell us that Zeus, watching from Olympus, finally intervened. He drew his son's spirit up from the pyre and welcomed him to Mount Olympus, granting him the immortality that had been promised at the very beginning of his labors. There, at long last, even Hera, the goddess who had spent his entire mortal life trying to destroy him, reportedly relented, formally adopting Hercules and giving him her daughter Hebe, goddess of youth.
So why does this story endure thousands of years after it was first told around ancient fires? Perhaps because Hercules was never really a story about strength at all. His hardest battles were never against lions or hydras or three-headed dogs. His hardest battle was the one against his own worst moment, the morning he lost everything to a madness he never chose, and the question of whether a life built on service, sacrifice, and relentless perseverance could ever be enough to earn forgiveness for it. He never stopped trying. Through 12 impossible labors, betrayal after betrayal, tragedy after tragedy, he kept choosing the harder path, exactly as he had at that crossroads as a young man. And in the end, that choice, not his strength, not his lineage, not even his victories, was what made him worthy of the name history remembers. If this story moved you, subscribe for more, because next we're diving into the darkest corner of Greek mythology, the curse that destroyed an entire royal bloodline, the House of Atreus. Trust me, you don't want to miss it.